Welcome to the Nature Here TV show. Today's episode is on toxins in wildlife, and our guest speaker today is Stephen Clark. He is a biology professor. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you very much.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I teach biology at Clark College in Vancouver, and I got a degree in environmental science locally, right here at Portland State.
Yes.
And as part of that degree, we had to do some research, and the research I did was on western pond turtle. That's a turtle that's about this big, and it was disappearing from our area. So I did a lot of work on those guys, trying to find out how come the babies weren't surviving. The adults were fine, but the babies wouldn't grow, couldn't survive their first year. So I did that, and that got me pretty close. That and the degree, you really had to be outside a lot and learn about nature and how things connected. And right now I happen to be helping a fellow work on a project that's looking at an animal that hikers have probably seen, but a lot of people haven't. It's called a pika. A pika is it's about the size of a guinea pig. I like to say it's the size of a potato, and it lives in rock slides, and there's all kinds of rock slides in the Columbia River Gorge. So it's in that area, but it's temperature sensitive, and so people are worried about how it's going to survive as the climate gets warmer. So I've been working on that lately, and all those things get me outside a lot. And then my students at Clark College, they ask me 1,000 questions, and so I end up reading and being out there and learning a lot about wildlife. So
it's something clearly you enjoy to do.
I love doing it.
Good.
I love doing it, and I love the teaching of it too.
Good. All right, we're going to watch a quick video from the Portland Audubon Society Wildlife Care Center.
I can definitely speak to some exciting rescue encounters. One that comes to mind in particular is a bald eagle that I picked up a few months ago. So there were a couple people with Department of Fish and Wildlife up in Washington doing surveys on a creek, and they called and said, there's this bald eagle that's down, it's not flying, and we're not entirely sure what's wrong with it. So since it's a bald eagle, only staff can handle those because, you know, they can be pretty dangerous. And so I packed up all my stuff and drove an hour and a half to get to it, and found out that it was across a creek and in through the forest. So there wasn't a trail, of course. So luckily I brought some waders, and so just waded through the creek, kind of bushwhacked to find the eagle. Luckily I was able to catch him pretty easily. Had to bring him then back through the bushwhack trail and across the creek so that we can get him into the carrier. Once we got him back to the care center and we did a further examination, it didn't seem like there was anything wrong with him, except for the fact that he was just really lethargic and, you know, just not right. And we did a blood test like we do on all of our raptors now, and it turned out that he had kind of off the charts levels of lead in his system. So once we found that out, we did an x-ray to see if there was actually any lead in the system that we could see, and there was. There were lead fragments in its stomach that we could actually physically see on x-ray. So then we immediately started treatment to get the lead out of the animal. We're still currently caring for the eagle. We have had some bumps along the way of his recovery, so it took a very long time for us to get his lead levels down below what we consider treatment levels. And then there were some issues with feather condition. So since the bird was on the ground, the tail feathers, some of the tail feathers had broken, and since we're releasing this bird back into its territory and it hasn't been there in a few months, we want to make sure that this bird has every single chance to get back in there and defend its territory, because most likely another male has come in. This lead most likely came from ingested shot. We see lead poisoning more than we'd like to with these raptors, and what happens is that you know, somebody shoots something with lead ammunition, either the animal dies and the carcass isn't disposed of, and then birds like eagles and vultures, or even like coyotes and things like that, will eat this free meal that they found on the ground and then ingest the lead shot. Or you know, an animal's shot and then it runs off and then the person can't find it and then it dies and then the lead shot's ingested. What happens is they'll eat the pellet and it breaks up in the digestive tract. So we don't see lead poisoning in shot animals. So if a bird's shot, we're not really going to see lead levels. It needs to have those really high stomach acid and it breaks it down and then it gets into the blood. But it really doesn't take that much. And we have received some hits of, you know, high lead levels and we can't see any lead in the system at all. Like we can't see, you know, any fragments in the stomach because they probably have passed it, but there's still this lead in there, or it's so small that we can't see it on x-ray, but it's still there.
That's a great video. I would really like to thank Lacey Campbell for doing such a great job with that bird and releasing it back in the wild, and what a success story for the Audubon Society and everybody there. It's such an amazing animal, you know, in general, and such sad things that happens to it. So lead in the animals and the environment, how are you,
Boy,
how does this affect everything?
She captured a lot in that. If you can see that picture behind me right there, that is an x-ray. She mentioned that there was an x-ray and they saw lead in the animal. And you can see lead in a blood test, that's one thing, but they actually saw lead in the animal. And that dark, or the bright white at the bottom of that picture, that's actually, and you can see it's kind of round, that's lead shot ingested in a swan. So what happened here, there's a swan that's ducking its head down at the bottom and picking up the food that it eats, and it picked up shot that, you know, someone shot over that pond, and they swallowed it. So that's what happened. They were looking for, you know, pieces of lead. Now the lead in a swan is going to be a little bit different from the lead in an eagle. An eagle, since they're a top predator, what they do is they scavenge. We think of them as hunters, but they're hunters and scavengers. And so if some animal is shot with lead shot, they'll take it, as Lacey said, they'll eat it, and they'll put it in their stomach, and then from their stomach it will get digested out. It's particularly tough on the California condor. California condor is one of the largest birds in North America, and they are scavengers, but they're so good at it that they have very impressive stomach acid. When they take it, they actually, if they get lead in their gut, it will get to their blood and go out throughout its body.
So it doesn't affect them as much as if it would.
No, it does more because they break it down better.
Oh, and then
they're so good at breaking down. It breaks it down. And then Lacey also mentioned that the eagle was on the ground. One thing that happens with lead, it replaces, it kind of goes in the body, and your body needs calcium, but lead will go into the brain and it'll say, hey, look at me, I'm just like calcium. And your body says, well, you're not calcium. No, I am calcium, and it'll fool it.
So it can camouflage into different things.
Exactly. And then what happens in your brain, yours, my brain right now, as we're thinking, talking, what we're doing is our brain is releasing calcium. But lead will go in there and mess up the calcium release, and it won't happen. You won't get that release. And I would suspect that's why the bird was on the ground. Its brain, if you were in that eagle, it would be like, wow, I don't know why I'm so foggy.
Like a comatose
I can't think of
state
anything.
almost. It just couldn't.
Yeah, it was like it had taken, it was just coming out of anesthesia because its brain just wasn't firing.
Functioning.
So, and then they said they're working on therapy. What are they going to do? They have to get the lead out of the body, and that is tough. It's one of the tough things about toxins. I told my students one time, if you took a little pebble accidentally, you're eating the sandwich at a picnic and you accidentally swallow a pebble, it's going to go right through your system. Lead doesn't. Some of it will go through your system, but some of it, the heavy metal, it will stay in your body. Humans who have lead poisoning, you can see the lead in their bones. You can see lead in teeth.
So it spreads out that much.
It spreads out, and then it will stay there.
Clings to things.
It clings to, that's well said. It clings to things, and then it will get released slowly, and when it does, it finds its way to the brain, and it mimics the calcium, and then you have all these troubles, a bunch of troubles. Another thing it does, you've heard of free radicals. People say, oh, we got free radicals, get rid of them. Your body gets rid of free radicals. I sometimes explain it like this. A free radical, it's almost like a magnet rattling around in a hardware store. It's going to pick things up because it's got a charge. It'll pick up a nail, pick up a screw. And what free radicals are they're chemicals. And they'll go by some protein in your body and they'll pick off a little bit of it. Like a kid in a bakery, and they'll see a cake and they take a little bit and they take a little bit. Those free radicals will do that in your brain. Happily, we have a lot of enzymes in your body that fight those. Lead defeats both. Lead makes more free radicals, and it defeats the cleanup crew in your brain. So that
It
eagle
affects so many different
and
things.
yeah, and when you say it's a neat thing to see what they're doing with the eagle, it is a neat thing, but I'd be interested in seeing that eagle a year from now. Can they get everything out, or is it always going to be one notch down from, is it going to be like someone who's trying to recover from a stroke?
Right.
I don't know where
And it keeps
will
coming
get.
back in little tiny
Yeah.
bits, and it's not
Yeah.
quite ever right where they're at. That would be definitely interesting to know.
Here's another thing about the eagle that makes it tough. This is a picture of the idea of bioaccumulation or biomagnification. Animals that are at the top of a food chain, like a whale or an eagle or a tiger, those guys sometimes have the worst toxin load. And here's why. At the very bottom of this picture, you see a little algae, microscopic, and it has a low density of poisons, those little blue dots. They're there, but they're not very dense. But the algae gets eaten by zooplankton, and the zooplankton doesn't get rid of any of those poisons. They cling to the body, like you said. The zooplankton gets eaten by a fish, and again, all the poisons stay, so now they're more densely packed. Then another fish, and more densely packed. And by the time you get to the top, they're so dense that some of those top predators can have poison levels 1,000 times higher than
It
the
just
bottom.
keeps compacting
Right.
one right after
If
the
you're
other.
thinking of poison, you would rather be algae than a whale. 'Cause
And you would think the opposite of that because you think it's such a large animal,
Yeah,
and
it's gonna
something so
spread
small
out.
that it's not going to make such a big effect on them. When really
Exactly.
it's quite the opposite.
Every time that whale takes a fish, it takes its entire load of poisons and it stays inside.
Oh, wow.
And that's bioaccumulation. And that happened with the eagle. The eagle would eat the animals and it keeps the lead, and eats another animal, keeps the lead. It eats 10 dead animals in a year, and 8 of them have lead.
Yeah, it's trouble.
A lot of poison.
Yeah.
Top animals, as we talk about toxins in the environment, often that'll be a theme. A theme will be it's the top of the food chain, and it's some toxin that doesn't easily go out of the body.
And that would be one of them.
That's one. Lead is a real pernicious one because of that.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Neurological problems because it messes up with the calcium. Yeah, it's a tough one.
So, obviously, the bigger the animal, it's going to have more lead in it. How are you? Not that you can't keep them from eating these animals that have lead in them. Obviously, they're going to be out there. So, what is something that's going to keep the lead from the environment? I mean, hunters are going to hunt, and there's going to be lead in the bullets. And I mean, I get all that stuff, and that's where they're at, even if they're not necessarily going towards those animals itself. But
Yeah.
I mean, what do you?
Right.
It's kind of like an uphill battle. I don't feel like it's something that.
It is. It's discouraging on some levels. Lead is illegal to shoot over water right now, and it has been for some years. So you can't, if you're going to go duck hunting, you can't use lead. But what happens, it persists in the environment. The swan, what swans do with their long neck, they can go in deep water because their neck is long enough. They can get their head all the way down to the bottom. They take all the stuff from the bottom. A duck has to be in shallower water. They've each got their little spot, but down in there you'll have fishing lures and lead from 15 years ago,
that's just
and they'll
hanging
still
out
take
there
it.
in
It's
there.
hard. With the California condor, since there are so few of them, and those guys are exclusively scavengers. What happens with those guys, and you'll see them, they've got little radio tags on them, they're highly monitored, and the wildlife people they'll capture them, and they'll give them almost like charcoal therapy. When a child eats some poison,
Right,
you give them
trying to
charcoal.
get out of their
Yeah,
system.
they will do that periodically to try and clean the lead out of their system.
Wow.
So the therapy for it, if you're watching the animal like a condor,
Then you can
do
obviously
something.
keep track of it.
yeah, but I couldn't help thinking of we don't have California condor here, and we don't have a bunch of eagles. They're just not as dense an animal.
Right.
We've got all kinds of turkey vultures, those guys that fly around in
Soar
circles, and they're scavengers, and they've got to be poisoned by lead.
Oh, I'm sure.
There's got to be some of those guys that don't fly anymore. They walk around, and like she said, then a coyote takes them, and then the coyote's got lead poisoning.
Right, then it just goes on to the next.
It's
and
really,
then that's a
it's
vicious
really
cycle.
tough.
It just,
It's really tough.
So what happens if, okay, so it goes to the wolf or something, a coyote or something like that, and then let's say that becomes something where a human would eat the next food that would eat that one, then is it something that we could possibly get at some point down the line, or does it?
Lead poisoning in human is going away. We're more aware of it. We don't, it used to be that some of the paints on toys and
Right.
in houses, lead solder in pipes. So I'm reading about this stuff, and I live in a house that was made in the 50s. Lead soldering in pipes was still legal. It was still
because like asbestos or something.
I know, but it's soft, it's easy to heat. You can solder the pipe. We're all done. There, your house is all plumbed. And now I turn on the water. I'm thinking to myself,
as you're looking at it,
I wonder how much of this is going to be stuck in my bones. You know, and I don't know if it's lead.
Clinging to me.
Nowadays, in new houses, there's no lead in there, and there isn't lead on the walls of the houses. That was, you know, lead paint was gone in 1977, something like that. So for humans, it's gone away. When I was a kid, I remember leaded gasoline and unleaded gasoline. It's all unleaded now, but it used to be leaded gasoline. So just standing on a street and the lead that you would inhale, I know that I have more lead toxin in me than someone who lived here 200 years ago.
Right.
I can't, it's
there.
unavoidable.
There's nothing you can do about it.
But you, younger than me, have less because you didn't have the lead growing up that I did.
Right.
So it's doable in the United States and the countries that are getting rid of lead in consumer products. Great, that's the right step.
So we're definitely making it more aware as far as it comes to humans. We just need to be making more aware when it comes to animals and how it is affecting nature.
I think so.
Because in the environment, it's a cycle. It all comes back. Eventually, it's going to come back to everybody.
One of the things I love about the classes I teach is the concept of ecology. And ecology means one thing is connected to another, is connected to another. When you want to make the eagles be healthy, you have to go down to the algae and make sure the algae. You got to start from the beginning. Yeah, you have to start low. Yeah. Right.
That's incredible. So we're going to talk a little bit about hormones.
Yeah, there's another thing I want to talk about. They're hormone disruptors. What people started noticing, oddly, is that they noticed it in bass. There's a study recently on smallmouth bass in the Potomac River. And what they were noticing is that some of the male fish had some slight female characteristics, and some of the female fish some male characteristics. And what was happening is they were getting what they call endocrine or hormone disruptors. There was hormones in the water. The simplest explanation I heard is that women who are on the pill, they will have excess levels of estrogen. Some of that will come out in urine and get into our water system. Some of it is just pills that are extra and they're thrown in the toilet. And then the fish, you'll see fish that are getting doses of estrogen. And estrogen, the estrogen molecule that impacts humans, it impacts fish as well. And so you can find, it's almost like the idea of what if you had a sex change therapy for a fish? You would give it little injections of estrogen or a little bit of testosterone. And the female fish would start to show some male characteristics and the males some female characteristics. And that's happening. And the source, that was the easy explanation, but it turns out the source is oftentimes it's being downstream of a feedlot for cattle. Because with cattle, if you can get them to grow fast, you'll get a higher return on your asset.
Right.
And to get them to grow fast, you would give them androgen hormones, muscle building, steak building.
So instead of letting nature kind of do its course and the animal doing what it does in nature and growing the way that it is, where it's bigger, better, faster.
It's more efficient. Well, the public says, hey, I would like my price low. And you can you can get $40 more a head of cattle if you can grow it faster. So the consumers, we always feel like, I can't believe those farmers would do such a thing. And there we're at the store saying, oh man, it's 10 cents cheaper over here. Right. Yeah, thank you, testosterone.
Right.
And the females, they give them estrogen because they don't want them having estrus or preparing for a baby. They just want them to grow, grow, grow. So you get those hormones and it disrupts the fish.
Well, and I don't feel like it's like anything in society anymore. I mean, everybody wants something for nothing, kind of thing. So it affects, at some point it's going to affect you. I mean, there's just no way around it. So in this situation, obviously, I've heard of hormones putting into fish and all that kind of stuff, like the salmon, they make them pinker even though they're not really pink. So I'm like, how do I know that I'm really eating salmon anymore?
I know.
I mean, you don't know anymore because everything's so, it's changed and everybody kind of does their own little thing. Science has done so many things to it. It's not.
Yeah, and a lot of that, in my opinion, is kind of driven by a consumer that wants a little lower price, little lower price, little lower price. And I feel like lower prices.
You pay a higher price later on.
Man, I used to be a bargain hunter. Now I feel like I'm in a 12-step program that says, hello, I'm Steve Clark, I'm a bargain hunter. And I'm recovering because I know that every time there's a bargain,
it's going to cost you somewhere else.
Yeah, there's a male fish with little tiny eggs. That's what they found in the Potomac River.
Wow.
There's another hormone disruptor that's closer to home. I've got a picture behind me of whales. These are the killer whales in Washington State. And what's in the background, you can see that it's a smaller whale. I almost said fish. It's a smaller whale, and it's also a little pinkish. Do you see that little color?
Yeah, the color is different.
And that tells you that it's a newborn. It's just days old, and this is a newborn. It's not new now. This is, I think, a 2010 photo, but it's a baby in the J pod. And what's interesting about that baby, it's sad, but there's another class of toxins that's kind of fascinating. They're called PCBs. And PCBs were used in industry. It's very oily. It's an oil-based product, and it's used to keep electrical processes cool. And what happens is sometimes you'll have a leak, and these oily substances will get into water. Sometimes they're just disposed of poorly. They'll get into water. Before people knew how dangerous they might be, they were released into the water. And what they are is they're a toxin that is soluble in fat, which means you don't urinate it out. It wouldn't dissolve in water like urine. It's going to dissolve in fat. So if I were poisoned with PCBs, where would I find them? I'd find them in my fat cells. I'd find them in my cheek. I'd find them in my hip. That's where I would find them. And here you have a whale, which has a large layer of fat.
Yeah.
And they eat salmon that have PCBs. PCBs were outlawed in the 70s, and some people think that our water won't be, in the Puget Sound, won't be safe until 2040 because it persists in the environment. It's one of those things that lasts a long time.
It doesn't just go anywhere. It doesn't go away.
No, but it will hook to fat cells. So here's the interesting thing, the sad thing about that baby. The female adult will eat fish, and that bioaccumulation, it gets more PCBs for every fish it eats. And it gets more and more poisonous, and then it has a baby. And that baby has all kinds of fat. And that's the first time the female is able to download its fat onto that baby. And when that baby comes out, out goes those fats. And the mom gets healthier at the cost of the first baby. And then the first baby nurses. And the fat content in whale milk is 40%. And in that dissolved fat are PCBs. And the mom gets healthier, and the baby gets sicker. And mom gets healthier, and baby gets sicker. And the firstborn whale, that one right there, the survival rate of firstborn whales is really low. Yeah, and that's a tragic thing too.
Well, and something that started, or at least they banned so long ago, and how many years? 2040, did you say?
Yeah,
it's
in the 70s. So
it's a long ways, and it's still, that's a long ways away. So in most people's lifetime, it's not even going to be out of the system already.
Well, when I talk about toxins, I think of what are the dangerous toxins. They're the ones that tend to persist in the environment. They're the ones that climb up the food chain. Those are two big deals for these toxins. And the lead persists a long time too. So there are other toxins that you can recover from in a few weeks, but the ones I'm talking about now, they're tough. Another thing about the PCBs, they will chemically, what they'll do is they'll go into a cell, and they'll go into where the DNA is, and they'll, right when your DNA unravels to make a protein, they'll go in there, the PCBs, and the cell thinks that's the right chemical, something that makes RNA, and it doesn't. It's the wrong one, and it makes your proteins wrong. It kind of messes up your gene expression. Does it still latch on? It latches on, and it says, go ahead and make this protein, but make it this way instead. And so these
the
whales,
whole dynamics.
When you look at the symptoms of PCB, it's hard to understand why would it be all these symptoms. This is on the kidneys, this is on the neural. Why are so varied? Because PCBs can impact the DNA.
That's incredible.
It's a tough
if it
one.
affects the DNA, that's what you
I would
are.
if you find one of the females, right? Yeah, the females, the female whales that have had multiple babies. So we're talking about a 40-year-old female. Those are healthier, but the other ones aren't.
Wow, that's.
Yeah, the PCBs are a tough thing.
Wow, that makes a difference. So mercury, talk to us a little bit about mercury.
Let me see if I've got, mercury is another bioaccumulated deal. Mercury, we get it mostly in water. So it's going to be, it's in the air. Unfortunately, one of the leading causes of mercury is the burning of coal. When you burn coal, a little bit of mercury floats around in the air, and when it touches the water, it goes in the food system, and once again, it's the little organisms that eat it, and then it stays in the system, and bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones. What happens, and pregnant women have this warning, don't eat these seafoods, don't eat tuna, don't eat shark, because those are top of the food chain in the water animals, and mercury has been building up in its concentration. And mercury does something interesting. Your body has a lot of enzymes, and let me tell you, I've got a little from my daughter. This is my model of a protein. So, of course, a protein would be microscopic. You couldn't see it, and a protein will have a certain shape. And this protein doesn't work right now because it needs a cofactor. Let's say it needs iron, and this is what happens. Iron has to bind in here, and when you have iron in here, now it works. And now this can go in my blood, and you know about iron in blood, and that will help you use your oxygen. What happens is you've got this enzyme and this part that works onto it, but instead of iron, you have mercury instead. And mercury will come in, and the enzyme says, oh, you're my iron, thanks so much, and it isn't.
So it's also kind of like a chameleon.
It's a chameleon, it's an imposter. It
so
goes in.
It can't distinguish the difference. It latches on the same. It's going to
That's right.
They're going to think it, feel it, everything seems to be the same, but
except
it's not.
This one makes the enzyme work,
and this
one
not.
prevents it from working. And mercury impacts selenium. Selenium is what you want, and mercury comes instead of selenium. Selenium, you hear about it once in a while because it's in our diet, sunflower seeds, some nuts, and so we need it, but we need it in little tiny quantities. And if you have acute, powerful mercury poisoning, you'll die from it. But people have tried to assassinate other people with mercury.
Really?
Yeah,
so
they'll try and pour mercury because no one did this. I suppose if we wreck all their selenium enzymes, they'll die. I'll put mercury in their water, and that will wreck.
Right,
but that's what's happening.
Solve it. Gotcha.
Yeah, the mercury comes in. It hits all these selenium species, 25 different enzymes, copied millions of times in your body, and it shuts down one system after another after another.
So once it's attached, is there any way of getting it out, or is it like once you've got it, you've got it? You just kind of have to deal with it, or?
No, it will come out of your system. It has a half-life in your system of 30, 60, 70 days, so it's not a long time. People get well from it, but what happens is some of the damage it does is irreversible. Sometimes you'll get some of these enzymes.
Effect.
Well, let's say a pregnant woman gets a higher than is healthy level.
Dose of it.
Yeah, and they've got gosh, I don't remember who the imposter is.
That's the imposter.
Okay, good. So here's the imposter, and that goes into the embryo. And now one of these sets of enzymes is designed to do the neural routing. So now the baby is going to have its neural routing incorrect. You get babies born with mercury poisoning, and they have poor neural development. Their central nervous system is impacted. People who have multiple sclerosis, there's a sheath that almost like the sleeve. My sleeve covers my neurons, and that sheath begins to degrade, and that's another thing that happens. These enzymes manage that sheath. They make it nice. They keep it right. But when it's impacted like this, it starts to degrade. And you've heard the term mad as a hatter? Mm-hmm. So the hatters in the old days, they used to use mercury to make the felt really soft. And as they used it, it got in their bodies, and it started tearing the myelin off of their neurons, and then you won't recover from that. It's not like a pulled muscle. So they would actually have a neural degeneration
because of that.
Yeah. So mercury poisoning in wildlife, of course, it's going to have impacts. It impacts fetuses of mammals in their neural development.
Are there certain industries that put out more mercury out into the environment than others?
Coal burning.
Okay, so is that like the main source of mercury in the environment?
I think I've read numbers like this. Half of the mercury that we're exposed to is from human-generated sources. Of those human-generated sources, 2/3 of that is from coal burning. And on the East Coast, where you have more coal burning than we have here, the samples in the water are more troubling than they are on the West Coast. So there's long been a connection regionally with mercury poisoning, but mercury poisoning, coal burning is the biggest one.
And can it be a food chain problem? Like, obviously the fish seem to be the first, but the fish seem to get eaten.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you
most.
wonder, the mercury is floating around the air, and say some of it drops on a pond, boing, and some on land. When it's in a pond, it's more troublesome. And I think it's because of this. As the mercury goes in there, you know, you've heard it, that if you've got filter feeders in an aquarium, they'll, all that, the 10 gallons, it'll go through all of that in a few hours. There's nothing like that on land. So yeah, the mercury is fallen on land, but in the water, the organisms in water tend to pick more of it up, and it gets bioaccumulated one after another, and it gets in higher and higher concentrations until it's deadly. So mercury poisoning.
So that would make sense why in the water it's going to be a more.
And it doesn't leave. It doesn't leave the system very well.
That's good to know. Another thing we'd like to talk about are bees.
I've got a nice picture of a native bee.
Nice bee right there.
Yeah, this is the bumblebee, and it's not the honeybee. The honeybee is what they call the European honeybee. This is bombus, which is bumble, and it's the western bumblebee. This guy is healthy, but I bring him up because he's a picture of the big black and yellow. It's the big black and yellow bumblebees. And what's happened is in the 1990s, people came up with an insecticide. And the idea, of course, is that, you know, we want to raise our crops. And I say, of course, but the idea is we want to raise our crops a little bit less expensively, so that we can sell them to people and people can buy more things, kind of a quality of life thing. And so they developed this insecticide. It's called a neonicotinoid. And when you hear that, you think, well, nicotine, that sounds right. Well, and nicotine is a compound that a plant makes, so that if I'm a fly and I fly down to a tobacco plant and I start eating it, I get that nicotine and it repels me. It's a natural insecticide in a way. The neonicotinoids have been engineered, and they were approved in 1990 sometime, and you spray those on the plant, and there's a couple troublesome things. One is they are what they call systemic. When you spray those on the plant, it doesn't just go on the leaf, it doesn't just go on the bug that's walking on the leaf, it gets taken up into the plant, into the flower, into the nectar, into the pollen. Even it will leach into the soil. And here's that same theme again. It doesn't go away. It'll stay there for months, sometimes years after the spraying. Even if you pull that plant out and you plant another plant there next year,
it's in the
enough
ground,
of it is in there.
That one's going to soak it up.
So then a bumblebee comes along, and no one's spraying the bumblebees. No one thinks the bumblebees are damaging. They're great.
They're grabbing it off all the
plants. But they're eating the nectar for protein, and they're eating the pollen for energy, and then they get poisoned. And the poison in those, the mechanism, it's a little bit like Botox. Botox is something that prevents neurons from firing, or it prevents them from receiving a fire. So if I've got a wrinkle here, you can put some Botox in there, and basically it says, when my neuron comes down here and tells me to smile, don't, and it won't. So it kind of does that to your face. And what happens with these with the neonicotinoids, they go into the bee, and the bee has an impulse from the brain, and it goes somewhere, and then it stops. It doesn't go any further. And you see bees that they don't forage properly. The number one killer is that they don't get home. They'll fly out, and they've got these great homing experiences, skills, where they can say, oh, now I just know exactly how to get back, and they don't. They can't get back. And that's led to what they call colony collapse syndrome, especially on the East Coast, but it's been coming west. The honeybees, colony after colony, 90% of them die. And they don't even find the dead ones, because a lot of times they're out there to flower going, I can't get home.
They can't function. They don't know what's going on.
They've been One person said the neonicotinoids are like DDT. DDT was effective as an insecticide, and it was released before it was really known what the impacts were going to be. And of course the impacts were disastrous. DDT was what Rachel Carson implicated when she wrote Silent Spring. She said, if we have those, we're going to lose all our insects, we'll lose all our birds, we won't hear any tweets in the spring, it'll be a silent spring. And so the United States banned DDT way back in the 1970s.
But all the other ones, are they still spraying with these pesticides?
Neonicotinoids.
I mean, obviously the long-term effects of these, whether they've done them years and years and years ago, are still affecting us today.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just go away.
Well, the people who develop these are in kind of a tough spot. They get this brand new product, they test it a little. Their first test, the preliminary tests seem like they're real good, and they don't hurt mammals, and they don't seem to be hurting birds much. And so they say it looks like a go. And then the people who are in agriculture, they say, wow, this could really save some money. We could have lower prices at the store. So everything looks like it's good, and then some party pooper comes out and says, well, we should test this for another 10 years. And it's hard to hear that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but what happens is when they spray these, everything's going well, and then later they notice colony collapse. And they say, what in the world is colony? And the research is actually fairly new. The product has been out since the 90s, but only in the last 5 years are there stronger and stronger studies that are saying neonicotinoids are playing a big role in that. And then the people who have gone to all the work to get them out there and put them on their fields and everything, they feel like, oh, you're telling me to go back, that this is no good? Yeah, it's
back to the drawing board.
Yeah,
it's frustrating.
I can see it being really tough. But again, other people say you can't release these things
without really knowing.
Without really knowing.
100%.
And knowing.
And do you ever really know 100% about anything? I mean,
no, you don't. You never do.
At some point, they have to be tested. At some point, they have to be out there. And unfortunately, it affects things. And the sad part for me is that I see with all these, with the hormones and with just with the bees and everything, it's humans that's, you know, they want it all the time. You know, they want more for less. You know,
right.
they want supply and demand. I mean, I get that. So then you've got all these people that are trying to create these things to make it bigger, better. You know, provide for everybody, do everything they want to do. It's total. It's selfishness is what it is when it comes down to the bottom line, and it's sad because it's affecting so many things. And what people don't realize is that at some point, even though they don't see the effect of it today, right here, right now, it's going to affect somebody.
Oh,
you know, I mean, it's just
that
the
is
long-term
exactly
effect
right.
of it. I mean, I think people don't realize it. I think they think, well, today it doesn't affect me, so it's really not such a big deal. But what about your children or their grandchildren or your great-grandchildren or whatever else?
That's
because
right.
the line, it doesn't stop. I mean,
not only does it not stop, but the organisms that are impacted are crucial also. So we talk about bee colony collapse, and we talk about the honeybees colony collapse. But, you know, one of the first bugs that was probably impacted by that was aphids. And no one's going, oh my gosh, the poor aphids. What are we going to do with the aphids? Oh, you know, you have to wait until it kills something that someone care about.
Right.
And that's difficult because it's hard for people to care about a lot of
anything but themselves. Usually that's really
hard.
what it comes down to.
We're wired that way. We're wired that way to care about us.
I totally get that. It's not that I don't. I can be that way. You know, my kids can be that way, and I see that. But what people need to be aware of is that something as little as the bumblebee, which most people clearly, my kids don't want to get stung by me, so they're like, I don't want to be around me anyway.
I know.
But the effect that it has on everything, you know, the life cycle, you know, how things go around, is just.
Yeah, that's a different perspective to start thinking of things in a way of how does this, or what role does this organism play in that beautifully scaffolded ecology. And that's why I brought up the picture behind me of the bumblebee, because everybody knows what a honeybee is like, but this bumblebee, that's native. That's the guy from Washington State. That's the guy when it's 60 degrees and raining, he's like, perfect, let's go find a flower. And the European honeybee is like, ooh, cold out there.
I can't handle
That's
it.
our guy right there.
Yeah.
You know, the same idea with the banana slug. The banana slug, hey, he's got quite a role. You know, it's hard to get enthused about a lot of these animals, and then we don't worry about them until the bald eagle. It was the bald eagle and the osprey and the falcon who had the thin shells because of DDT, and they were getting pregnant, and they would lay the egg, and then they would sit on the egg and crush the baby, and they one after another would die until all you had was old falcons and old eagles, and they couldn't have babies anymore. And that's when people said, we got to do something, and they stopped DDT. But people realized that pretty late in the game. I do too.
Well, because it takes something large like that. You know, like you said, you look at a bald eagle and it's like, oh, it's just a bee. You know, it's no big deal. But you look at a bald eagle and you're like, oh my gosh, it's a bald eagle. You know, let's save the bald eagle, or something of a larger mammal or something like that.
Right.
And I
a polar bear.
Right. And you know, the panda bears that were just born, and there's not very many of them. And I get that. I can understand how people can associate with that. But I think if the awareness on something smaller, that even though it's so small, has such a large effect on everything, you know, the bigger perspective of what it has. I mean, I get that it's hard to see. I mean, it's not that I don't get it. I do, because I'm myself am at fault. But it's too bad that it takes something so large.
Well, I think that can change. You know, the people who care, that's a funny thing to say, that people care, because I think all the people care. But I'll say it this way. The people who are out fishing a lot they care about fish. They notice the shoreline. The people who are out hiking, they care about things that they see. If you're outside,
and what you do.
Yeah, if you and your kids are going outside, and if you stop and say, "Oh my gosh, that's a bumblebee. That's not a honeybee. That's a different kind. Look at that." And it has 2 stripes, not 1. And if you start doing that, then people start to care. And then I don't want people to overcare, but I don't want them to undercare. I want them to recognize,
right, acknowledge
that things are connected, and you can't pluck one thing away and just have everything work. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work that way.
So these toxins in the environment, lead, mercury, neonicotinoids, PCBs, a bunch of hormones, there's a lot of toxins, and they do impact things. And when you tell people, that's what you hear. I didn't know that, and what can I do?
Right. And so you look at in today's society, or some even watching the show, is there something in particular that they can do? Even just the littlest things. I think awareness in itself is huge.
The littlest things are the best, because one of them, if I were to say a couple things that I think help me to be conscious as I consume, as I live. One is like small, not just because I'm a tiny human, which I am, but a small house, a small car, a small footprint. Liking things small helps. With as many people are on the planet right now, if we all want things big, we just can't gobble up that many reaches. So I like liking things small. A lot of young people now, they like to have a small car and they like to ride their bike. And I think to myself, hats off to you. Liking small is nice. There's young people who say, 2,000 square feet, that's too big a house. Give me something smaller. Portland has those, some micro houses.
I like small. It's less cleaning for me to have to do.
There's a lot of efficiency. The stuff, what do they say? Stuff expands to fill the space you have.
Yeah.
If you have smaller space, you have less stuff. So liking small is one. Liking nature is the second. And that's why I was talking about the people who are outside. That's a nice thing. But then the third thing, and this is the hard sell, but this is, there is no such thing as a bargain. When you think you're buying something inexpensively, what you are is you're transferring the cost is being transferred. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to have this, it's really inexpensive, and oh, I see the salmon have volunteered to pay part of that bill for me. Oh, look at that. I've got this electrical product inexpensively because the killer whales are bearing part of the price. It's a brutal way to think of it, but you have to think of what else is taking up that price. So, like I said, I'm on the 12-step program, and I'm saying there's no such thing as a bargain. If it's cheap, I'm leery. I feel like I'm ripping something off.
Well, you can't get something for nothing. I think people, obviously a better deal, people always look at it. I look at it too. I'm like, oh, that's a great deal. But at some point or somewhere along the line, you're getting a good deal for, there's another, another key to it. There's another part of it that you're not looking at. And I think because society has taught us so much to just jump impulse on, oh, a good deal. Hey, I'll take it. Instead of actually looking at it and going, why is it such a good deal?
That's exactly right.
And I think when people sit back and go, why are we getting salmon so cheap? Or why are the prices of beef, going down? Or, whatever it is that we're seeing, there's got to be another thing behind it, because it wasn't that way 50 years ago.
Exactly.
And the cow hasn't changed, and the fish hasn't changed, and the process of it hasn't changed. So why, especially when things are getting more expensive now, would it be cheaper?
Yeah, why would it be? And that should raise your eyebrows. There are some good signs, There are some stores. I mean, I really like what some stores are. You'll see it with co-op stores. You see it with New Seasons. These stores that say, we want to tell you what we're selling. We want to tell you why it's good. It's good because we didn't bring it in from far away.
Not
we
farm
grew it
grown,
local.
it's not.
And so what they're doing, they're not saying, we like it because this is the bottom dollar. They're telling you, giving you another set of values that you can make choices on.
And let me break it down for you. This is what you're paying for.
That's right. That's right. And you can find that in a lot of different segments, not just food, but there's clothes stores say, let me tell you where we got this cotton. Let me tell you where we got this coffee. With this coffee, we didn't make a monoculture. We grew coffee trees here and native plants next to it, then a row of coffee, then native plants. There's wineries. I have a friend of mine who runs Klickitat Winery. They have grapes, and then they have native grasses in the middle, then grapes and native grasses. And you see all kinds of native birds and insects coming in.
What a difference that the environment makes in just something so simple as that.
And if you know it, you can buy that. If you say, oh, now that's the kind of wine, oh, does it really taste good? I like how they're doing it. That's ecology wine. That's ecology groceries. That's ecology shirts. That's what I like.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm not the best at it. I've got 4 children, so sometimes it gets a little bit more expensive to be able to
It does.
buy. And I understand that also with people when, you know, if you can't afford it, and even though you want to do it, but I think if you can take a little bit of it, or at least make them aware that they have the option. You know, that there are things out there, and it doesn't always have to be more expensive, and you can grow your own things, and you can do, there are things that you can do on your own.
Yeah.
You know, as far as when it comes to financially.
Well,
because I know that pays effect in it. I mean, I know it does with me. If I look at something and you've got $1.50 here and $2 there, it's hard to draw the line.
Let me submit this though. I would submit this, that if you are really broke, and I was when I was a kid, when we were really broke, our mom didn't have very many choices. But beyond that really broke section, I would say that even if you're low on money or you feel tight, you still can make moral purchases. I wouldn't want to get to be at the other extreme. You could say, hey, only if you're wealthy can you make moral purchases. See how funny it sounds to say that? So you don't want to say that. And
people, they tend to look, they're like, oh, I don't shop at that store because I don't, you know, I can't afford those kind of the fish that have been raised that way, or whatever it is. You know, I have to shop at the bottom of the totem pole because that's where I'm at. When I don't necessarily think that's where people's at, I think it's an assumption, or it's a tag or label that somebody's been given.
Yeah.
And so, and it's hard, once you have that, it's hard to get rid of that label.
I
you know,
agree.
you get in that mindset and you're thinking, well, this is the category that I'm in, so I guess this is the category. I'm not in this category, so I can't be there.
Yeah.
And I think even if you can take a little bit of it, you know, maybe you can't afford everything there, or not all of it, you know, certain things that is not going to be that way. But the main thing, the basic things, that, you know, the whole sum, I guess, the lump sum of it that you should.
Yeah.
You know, I think if people kind of start looking at it a little bit differently.
I'd be interested, you know, if we had in Washington State, big agriculture state, and we get worried about neonicotinoids or other insecticides. There are some insecticides that, or herbicides that will go into the water, and some farmers have been encouraged, or they'll volunteer to farm a certain distance away from the closest water. Well, that means they have less land to plow, less land to harvest, and so that's more expensive. And if someone put, you know, this is a riparian, a watershed friendly food, that's part of the value for me. That makes the apple look a little bit redder. So I'm interested in that. I'm willing to pay for things like that. And that does help, because then I know I'm doing a little bit to reduce the toxin loads. And if someone says that we will not spray neonicotinoids until we know they're safe, and I don't think they're going to find out they're safe. My guess is, and it's a guess now because the science isn't all out there, my guess is though that they are a toxin that it's not worth it to have. It's not worth it to lower that price. But I'd like to see that and say,
I don't expect, you know, the farmers or the people that grow the wine or anything else to be like, hey, I'll put a little space between, put some grass, when they're losing obviously a row of trees or grapes or whatever it is that they're growing. I get that. But I think it's the few people that stand out and go, you know, even though this is cutting back on how much I can produce, and even though this is raising my prices, and I know this puts me in a specific category, you know, of a different clientele, then I think that people kind of become a little bit aware. I think, unfortunately, so many people are kind of fighting for that top dollar, fighting for the, you know, the best, that it's hard for the little guys to keep up with that. Yeah. You know, it's hard to keep up with the Joneses when you're trying to not be them.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think there's no such thing as a bargain, and that things do take away from ecology. Can I bring up my little bike example?
By all means, bring up your bike. Show us what you have here.
Well, I have a bike here because sometimes I like to think of this as our native environment, and it works. It's got a bunch of pieces just like our native environment does. And the idea behind ecology is that everything is connected to everything else. So you can look at your ecology, you can look at your bike, and I've heard people say, well, what would happen if we lost this bee or something like that? And I thought of a bike. You know, what would happen if you lost a bee? Could you take part of this ecology, part of this system off, and would it still work? So yeah, I can take one piece off and it still works. And then I say, well, could you take any more out? Well, yeah, I guess I could take this off. The bike still works. Then you say, well, what else could you take off? And you could take off a few more things. You could cut out a few spokes. You could cut off, you know, some things, and it would still work. But at some point, it's going to get pretty brutal. You're going to say, well, I'll take off a pedal. You know, and when I take that pedal off, I can still make it work because I've still got the other pedal. It'll still ride. So at this point, I'm taking off a pedal. Now, when you take off a pedal, you notice it. So this would be like the extinction of the black rhino. People notice that. They notice it and they lament it. Wow, that system was a lot better when that part was there. And you can take another one, but it'll be a top predator, like the eagle is gone. And now you can look and people say, wow, it really is a compromised system. At some point, you're going to get to where you're going to start taking off the front wheel. And then it's going to be a total crash. But the point I like to think of is, it was a little bit of a crash
in the beginning
when you took those first things off. Everything is designed to make the whole thing work. And so I like to think of ecology as a whole system. And when I walk down, I want to be conscious of that. I don't want to disassemble my
entire
system.
bikes before you figure it out what's really going on.
So that's a way I think of ecology. I think of it as, you can probably take some pieces out and the system will still run, but don't take pieces out and think it didn't matter. It did matter. So living small, getting rid of the idea that there's a bargain, and then liking nature by being out there, liking it, and then recognizing that things are connected. And a lot of people are doing that. Actually, Portland is doing that a lot. United States is the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. Those things are good.
It's catching up slowly but surely. I think people are definitely becoming more aware than they've ever been.
I
think awareness by far is definitely, is
awareness
coming up
is one,
there.
and then the next thing is, can you take the step and do something? And I'm interested in pursuing that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, sadly, I think a lot of people, I'm aware that the rhinos we're losing the rhinos, or with the bumblebees and the pesticides, or the fish, or whatnot. And people are like, yeah, that's really a bummer. I think until it actually affects them personally, I don't think people really, really get a hold of it. It'd be like anything. It's like cancer. You're like, oh, breast cancer awareness and trying to keep up with it and all that kind of stuff. But until somebody in your family has it, all of a sudden it's a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah.
Now you're like, wait a minute. What can I do for it? What are my options out here? I think, like with your bicycle thing, it's the same way. You take off the little stem to it, and you're like, oh, it doesn't really affect me too much until you're down to where you don't have any tires and you can't ride it anymore. And now all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Now it affects me. So I don't know. I don't know how to make people so I think it's just like in human nature. I just don't know how people make so aware until it physically affects them, until it personally hits home. I just think in today's society that we have a hard time with that.
We do, on the one hand, because we have because we really want a low cost and because we're emergency oriented. But on the other hand, every time someone goes on a hike, every time someone's outside, every time someone does something where they interact with nature, frankly, even going to the zoo where you start to see animals, it's artificial. But when you go there, especially little kids, they start to care about things. And I think those are steps in the right direction.
A little bit. Well, and the Northwest is a great place.
It is. It's a great place.
With the mountains and the oceans. I mean, there's just so much around here.
That's right. And it's a nice place to start liking things. I think people do like things. My students, they come into class, I almost feel like they're saying, show me what else I can like because I'm ready to like it. And if you're outside, you will like it. And if you start liking it, then you recognize, oh, I want to keep it.
Yeah, what's in your environment. And yeah, I like it that it's green around here. I like it that maybe, okay, it rains. Okay, and I'm not going to say I like the rain because most of the time I don't. But I understand the effects of it and how important it is. And then I go to another state where it doesn't get as much rain. I'm thinking, I think I'll go back where I came from because it's so nice there. And
it is.
I think we take so many things for granted, in everything. I think we take things for granted, even something like gasoline in a car,
Well, and that's what's nice to see about that eagle, there's a whole group working hard, the veterinarians, the people who are feeding that eagle every day, and they're going to get that eagle back outside again. And when you see things like that here in Portland, and it's a local bird, that's been eating fish in our area, you start
it hits
caring
home
about
a little bit.
How many people have volunteered now for stream restoration? It's a real popular thing for people to do because people are starting to see, what they can do. Myself, I feed birds all the time. I like seeing them. I like having them have a good habitat. I think it is going in the right direction. I'm concerned about people wanting everything cheaper because cheaper puts a lot of pressure on our industries to produce toxins.
Put things out there.
Because
exactly.
To
make it cheaper,
the consumer. It will help the
yeah.
consumer.
And I think that's probably more than anything. I think that's probably the main key factor is that the more that we demand things to be cheaper, the more that it's going to affect us. And so I think people need to understand, or at least kind of wrap their brains a little bit around it, that you keep wanting that. I mean, cheaper is nicer. I get that also, but it's affecting us.
It is.
And it's affecting us.
It's tearing apart your bike.
It is, and in more ways than we see. And by the time that we actually, think about it, we're like, oh, wait a minute, now that the pike's down to nothing, you know, now that we kind of see it. So I think if people, you know, supply and demand with anything in society, I think if people start to kind of back up a little and go, you know, I don't mind paying a little bit more for something that's a little bit better for me. I think if people can think that way, then the farmers and the agriculturalist people, all the people can actually back off a little bit on trying to make it to fit everybody up all the time, you know, the way that we want it, then I think it'll be better for us.
I agree.
And it's just making, you know, more than it's just making people aware. I think that, you know, that's why we have you on the show and other people and stuff like that, just so the people can be aware of, you know, what's out there. Because you hear things in the news and you hear just a tidbit, you know, a clip of it. You're like, oh, the bald eagle, you know, got lead poisoning. You don't really hear anything else about it. And you're like, okay, but like you said, you know, how's the bald eagle going to be a year from now? You know, the lead's not going to go away.
It won't go. There's our efforts to make ammunition that doesn't have lead in it. They're being fought, but the efforts are out there, so that's an encouraging sign too. It's discouraging, and that brings us into political difficulties too, because we would like to convince people to reduce lead in the environment, and I think that I can't imagine that won't happen. You know, people are aware of it, and they're going to try and get lead out, but it'll happen slowly, and you know, I wish it would happen more quickly. But there are some states that are experimenting with, a lot of manufacturers are making heavy, the ammunition needs to be heavy to come out of the chamber properly. If it's hard, it will damage the interior of the barrel because lead is soft, and so they're designed for a soft metal. So there's some things out there that are troublesome, but there are ideas. There are ideas out there that are making it happen. So I think that toxin will go down. And clean coal, there isn't any such thing as clean coal. Cleaner coal could reduce mercury. It won't get rid of it, but it could reduce it. Coal's problematic on a lot of levels, in my opinion, but there are ways to get rid of some of those toxins.
Well, it's been a great show today. I really appreciate it, and I thank you so much for coming and doing that with us. And I would like to welcome everybody back for our next show, and thank you for watching the Nature Here show.